Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Richard Rhames, my old friend from Biddeford. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Bruce. It's always a pleasure.
It's great, always a pleasure to have you here. You were recently defeated as you ran for re-election in the Biddeford City Council. What happened?
Well, we raised taxes. There had been, it's a common, I don't know what it's like up here, but down in York County, basically Saco, Sanford, most of the towns and cities had been going on this zero-based budget thing. You can't raise taxes. And, you know, the roads were falling apart, the schools were being short-funded, people being laid off. And, you know, at some point, I mean, basically most of the towns down there did raise taxes because you have to. If you're gonna have public stuff go on, you have to fund it. And the cost of everything is going up, and revenue coming to public institutions has to reflect those realities. So anybody who was part of that, and I was pretty vocal about the need to fund public stuff, you know, we lost. So that's okay. It had to be done, and now the guys who are presently serving, and they are all guys, and we have a majority Republican city council and mayorality. I mean, some of them claim they're Democrats. They're not. They're Republicans. The out Republicans are for, and then we've got a couple of closet types. So anyway, I mean, they will coast for a while on the revenue that was raised by the previous council and the work that was done by the previous council, like closing down our favorite regional incinerator and making some other structural changes that I know will, in the long run, be of great benefit to the population. But you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, and I was an egg.
It seems to me that local communities have had everything dumped on them.
Sure.
The federal government is not funding a lot of social progress these days. The states get dumped on. The states are...
And they dump.
And so it all falls back on the
That's
local
right.
guys. Is that right?
Sure it is. I mean, that's common sense. Everybody can see that. People at the elected officials at the local level, they understand that very clearly. But you know, it was part of the stuff that actually Kennedy started. You know, the sainted John Kennedy, the big liberal. I mean, he was the first one that cut the top marginal tax rate at the federal level. And the few good years that the United States had in the middle of the 20th century were largely as a result of progressive taxation and federal government involvement in the life of the population. And that all began to change, starting with Kennedy, accelerating under Reagan, who dramatically cut back the tax structure. And basically there was less revenue being raised at the federal level, and there was this shift, this cost shifting down to the states under the mantle of states' rights, and how the states are somehow more accountable to their populations than the onerous federal government. And then, of course, the states were playing the same game. They were squeezing and dumping it down on the locals.
So if you live in a wealthy community, you're going to be able to probably get by. But if you live in a working class community like Biddeford,
you're going to be squeezed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's basically by zip code.
Yeah. Democracy by zip code.
Well,
or
civilization by zip code.
Okay, all right. Let me ask you this about public access TV, like what we're doing here today. You've had a show for many years. How many years in Biddeford?
Oh boy, we're going on, I think this is our 10th year on the Out in Left Field show. I did what I called a labor show and began as Kavanaugh's Corner starting in like 1990. And did that for about 10 years. And I still do the occasional labor show, most of the effort, because I'm getting old and in the way. And so basically the Left Field show is about all I've been doing for 10 years.
Have you seen a change in public access that kind of moving away from the public part of public access?
Well, the public part of public access is you only gain the ground that you can fight for and win. In Biddeford, we are one of the few cities in the state that actually dedicate the franchise fees to public access. Most towns and cities don't do that. They take the franchise fees and they put them in pothole filling or whatever. The only reason that we did that was because we had a group, the Biddeford Public Access Corporation, that basically was a lobbying and program generating outfit. Most of us were producers or were involved in production. And we made this idea of locally produced TV kind of indispensable. And even people who hated the idea and saw it as communist, at the end of the day, had to come out and say, oh, I'm a big supporter of public access, just, there's some programs I don't like. Well, that's the fatal charm of public access. If it's really public access, you're not supposed to be able to get rid of the stuff you don't like. And it's based on this principle, at least it used to be, of sweat equity. If you're going to be involved in putting a crew together and doing a show, then it should be up to you what goes on your show. And the public access facility is basically it's kind of like a public park, and this is a soapbox, except you're not restricted to the people who are walking through the park that day. You can gain access to people in their living rooms, which is the subversive power of conventional TV.
Yeah.
They're in people's heads all the time, brought to you by some right-wing fascist corporation. And this is a small beachhead in that campaign. And as you indicate, I think it's under assault.
Some towns are cutting back. I know in Brunswick, where I've had a show for more than 10 years, a regularly scheduled show, they're now cutting back my set times that I've had for those 10 years. And
Sure.
and it appears that this is an effort, and I'm hearing this from other producers as well, not just mine, but other people that are doing political shows, that there's an effort to kind of move them out, even to the late hours, like 1 and 2 in the morning,
Sure.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the problem for public access is that it exists on TV, and people, the real subversive nature of public TV, public access TV. There's this great documentary that was put together by one of George Stoney's students. George Stoney is a luminary in the beginnings of public access. It's called Everyone's Channel, and this documentary, if you haven't seen it, you should. And the opening of it is this archival footage of like a test pattern. Some people may be old enough to remember test patterns, and it's jimmied up as like a safe. There used to be a thing in the middle of the test pattern, and a hand comes in and unlocks the safe and opens the circular door to the vault. And inside there's this archival footage of these guys with headphones and stuff, and they're all like, technical men control the signal. Well, people have this idea that TV has to be done by technical men. And that TV is something that's done to you. It's a very passive medium. And the true dangerous part of public access is this idea that you don't have to rely on a professional class in order to gain access to the quote-unquote viewers, to the audience, the consumers.
Yeah.
That TV ought to be for everybody.
Yeah.
And if you have the initiative to put a crew together and to organize a show, you ought to have access to those people. That's a fundamentally dangerous idea in a totally kept society such as ours.
Let's move to international for a minute and talk about the situation in Ukraine. The U.S. and NATO for several years have been expanding and moving to surround Russia. including with these new missile defense systems that
So-called.
so-called, that are key elements in U.S. first strike attack planning. When
There's a whole show there, by the way.
yeah, that's right. You have to have me on and talk about that
Well, if you can never get to Biddeford on a Wednesday,
on my scooter.
yeah.
Yeah. When George Herbert Walker Bush, Daddy Bush, was president, it was the time of the Berlin Wall falling, the reunification of Germany. Russia, or at that time the Soviet Union, agreed to that, but were promised by then Secretary of State Jim Baker that NATO would not expand 1 centimeter to the east.
Right.
All right, take us from there. What's happening today in the quick version?
Well, the quick version is you can't trust policymakers in the United States. They will always go for other nations' jugular. They will kill people to further the financial interests of the oligarchs that run this country. And so, the ink wasn't dry on the page, and they were already figuring out how they were going to, get into all of those lands. The reason for these so-called satellite states that NATO is now planting all of these so-called defensive/offensive bases in is those were the gateways into the former Soviet Union during World War II. And Kennedy almost blew up the world because the Soviet Union provided a few missiles to Cuba back in the day. We would not tolerate that kind of coercive and structural threat to the landmass that we occupy. We simply wouldn't do it.
In other words, if Russia or China or India were trying to put bases in Mexico or Canada, we'd be freaking out.
We'd have our finger on the button, as we did.
But
you
today-
only have to look it up.
But today, the United States, using NATO, is doing that very thing
Absolutely.
to Russia.
And I think that's the lens that is unfortunately missing and conveniently missing from conventional U.S. reportage on this stuff. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody who has lived in Russia or the former Soviet Union. Okay. Should they tolerate something that the United States won't tolerate? Why? It's a much older civilization than ours, much older society. It has made tremendous advances. Okay? It's a civilized nation. It's a first world nation. It has power and wealth. Tremendous natural resources.
They have the world's largest supply of natural gas.
Which
in
is why
Russia.
we want it.
Yeah.
So, and they have an educated population. It's a civilized place. They don't want to put up with the kind of stuff that we would not tolerate for 1 minute. And you can't blame them. Consider whether the United States would tolerate for 1 minute the kind of intervention in our political life that we foist on countries all over the world.
Now let's look at Ukraine.
Ukraine.
First of all, most Americans can't find Ukraine on the map.
Demonstrably, I think. You just did some polling, didn't they?
Where is Ukraine?
Well, it's on the is it the Black Sea? It's strategically located, and it's basically the kind of some of the seminal culture from Russia came from there. It's a large part of Ukraine has agricultural resources, kind of the breadbasket.
But it borders Russia. It's right on the Russian
Yeah,
border.
exactly. Yeah, like all of these, and Georgia,
Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia.
Yeah. And there was already a push, these various color revolutions, so-called, that the United States has been funding over the years. The Soviet Union or Russia had to intervene because this guy Shalikashvili in Georgia was basically killing people, and the South Ossetia. this was about 10 years ago, and probably people don't remember. I mean, it's fading in my memory. But there have been these pushes funded up by the American government that have been trying to push on Russia and to try to take it apart. And Russia has been resisting, mostly through economic and reaching across the aisle means.
So the Rand Corporation out in California has a study that calls for the breaking up of Russia into various pieces.
Sure.
So that oil corporations can get a hold of the natural gas.
What we did to Iraq.
Yeah.
That's the scheme.
Now, the Victoria Nuland, the U.S. State Department official that is famous,
The wife of Robert Kagan.
who's a Bush-Cheney neocon, correct?
Yeah.
She's the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs that was caught on tape saying F the EU.
Which is the only part of the conversation that actually got any traction in the U.S. media.
Right, but what they were really talking about, her and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, was after this so-called revolution in Ukraine just a few months ago, who's going to be in charge of the country? The EU wanted one person, the Americans wanted another. They wanted Yats. And so Yats is now in charge of the country. But last December, there's a video of this same Victoria Nuland in Washington.
With the Chevron poster.
With the
flag,
Chevron on one side
yeah.
and ExxonMobil on the other, reporting that from her 5th trip to Ukraine, and she said, we've spent $5 billion on this project. And what happened was, we now know that the National Endowment for Democracy,
So-called,
is funding various NGOs and everything else, and they created the opposition. Essentially, they funded and directed the opposition.
We do it all over the world. This is standard. And like I say, the United States wouldn't tolerate that kind of crap.
But the American people.
Can I say crap on public access? The United States government, when I think it was Al Gore when he ran, remember the Buddhist temple thing?
No,
some Buddhist nuns or something rolled a couple of bucks at Gore, and this was taken as foreign intervention in the United States political structure. Like I say, we wouldn't tolerate it for one fraction of a second. And in one country, Nuland stands up in front of God and everybody, or Goddess and everybody, and says, we dropped $5 billion just in that backwater.
Yeah.
All right? And we do this all over the place.
And it was today is May 6th, I believe. And it was just announced yesterday, I heard, that the United States is going to spend a good amount of money. I don't know the exact number, but we're sending money to the May 25th Ukrainian elections. So the U.S. is going to bankroll some of the May 25th.
This is democracy promotion, Bruce. Didn't you get the memo?
Yeah.
I mean, just to riff a little bit more on that Victoria Nuland tape, and it's available online. You ought to, if the damn computer's worth it. Can I say damn?
No.
No, okay, I'm sorry. If the computer is worth anything, you can go on YouTube and you can listen to Vicky and this guy Jeff Piat, or whatever his name was, and they're basically comparing notes about who they want to lead the government. And Nuland is very clear that they don't want Klitsch. Klitsch needs to stay on the outside. Klitschko, he's a boxer. He didn't even live in Ukraine anymore. He was living in Germany. That's why Germany was, they kind of favored Klitsch. And she wants Yatsenyuk, who, speaks English, of course, and he's one of these IMF guys. Right after they got power, friggin' Yat. Can I say friggin'? No. Anyway, no, I can't say it. So Yats, I'm bedeviling you something awful today. Yats goes public saying that basically this newly installed regime is going to commit political suicide because taking this IMF money, which is cast in the West as moving closer to the West, they're going to do the structural adjustment. They're going to cut pensions. They're going to end the fuel subsidies. People are going to be shivering and starving in the dark and in the cold in Ukraine. And Yatsenyuk is very clear that this is going to cause some really severe problems, which he characterizes as essentially political suicide, kind of like me voting to raise taxes in Biddeford, only much worse.
Yeah.
Much worse. Okay, this is the regime that's been installed by us, by Vicky, okay, and the public I think has no idea. I mean, I brought this up at the band table a while back, and nobody at the table even knew who Vicky Newland was.
Well, and now, just 2 days ago, in Odessa, Ukraine, there was a sort of an Occupy encampment out in front of a big union building in Odessa, and a bunch of neo-Nazi thugs were brought in from Kiev. They marched on this group and began beating them up and burning down their little Occupy encampment. These were people that were not happy with the Kiev government, all the things that are happening. They're protesting against it, the things you were just describing. So the people ran into the union building, and again, there's video.
And the Nazis set it on fire.
And these Nazis are neo-Nazis, right sector they're called. They made Molotov cocktails, threw them into the building where people ran in there. And there are videos showing them shooting at people who were trying to get out the window. People eventually jumped out the window because of the fire.
Sure. I think some of the video shows the Molotov cocktails being thrown into second-story windows.
That's right.
And breaking the glass out.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
It's not just right sector. There's also this Svoboda party, and these are fascist and proto-fascist outfits based on this guy Stepan Bandera, who was a collaborator with the Nazis in World War II. They got statues of him. The right in Ukraine has erected statues to this guy. They were tearing down the former Soviet statuary and leaving these things untouched. These are the kind of people. These are our kind of guys.
These are the guys that the United States has supported.
Absolutely,
today.
but this same thing in Latin America over the years. The United States government prefers fascists.
And you know,
for a reason.
In the new government that was created, quote unquote new government that was created after they toppled the government in Kiev, there are about 5 neo-Nazis that were appointed to the cabinet.
In the security forces, mostly so-called.
Yeah. So this is the story, and at this very moment, it was reported last night. I saw on Yahoo News. You have to trust Yahoo News, right?
You got to trust somebody.
They were reporting that a German newspaper was carrying the story that U.S. CIA and FBI agents were in Kiev helping to direct this entire operation of sending the Ukrainian forces, a lot of them these neo-Nazis, into the eastern part of the country, closest to the Russian border, where people have been protesting. So,
well, on some level, they have to do that because, as has been reported to some extent, even in there was a piece in the Press Herald this morning where they're quoting Yatsenyuk, basically saying that the local police forces have been ineffective or unreliable because the locals refuse to shoot folks. They know these folks. They don't want to shoot them, so they got to send the Nazis in from Kiev.
Yeah,
no problem.
And also in recent days, throughout Europe, John Kerry, the Secretary of State, Joseph Biden, our Vice President, have been going to the European countries and twisting their arm, asking them to, really demanding that they spend more money on the military, put more money into NATO, which means essentially that they would be buying more weapons from the United States. What do you think it says ultimately about the soul of our nation here in this country, that we have to sell weapons for endless war in order to feed our families, for workers to feed their families here in this country?
Well, I guess I would, we're past Martin Luther King Day, but I guess I would quote Martin Luther King. I think he said it pretty well 50 years ago, that basically any nation that spends more money on weapons than it does on societal social uplift is facing spiritual death. Piece in the paper this morning about the shipyard in Bath. And all of this money that's being put into the Zumwalt class. And it's portrayed as just good news. There's no downside to this. You know, having an economy based largely, maybe totally, as far as the industrial sector, on weapons of mass destruction. That's considered to be a plus because there's apparently no other game in town. We're structurally unable to build rail or anything that's useful, apparently, for ordinary people. We've offshored all of that. So, you know, we build things to kill people and blow stuff up.
We have 5 minutes left. I want to get your very quick prediction on the governor's race here in Maine this
Michaud.
fall. Say it again.
Michaud.
Michaud's going to win?
It's his to lose.
Yeah. And what do you think ultimately the role of the state is? Governor LePage has tried his best to decimate as much social progress as possible. Mm-hmm. What do you think the role of the state is here at this time? We only have about 3 minutes left.
Well, the state, as you call it, or local government, these are public institutions that are at least theoretically open to the will of the population. That's why they have to be deconstructed. And this is a straight power game. And corporate types like Mr. LePage don't like the idea any more than Cliven Bundy liked the idea that there's such a thing as a public sector. You know, the people at the top, the pigs, they just want more and more and more, and they want to basically loot the public sector. And that game is well along.
Your button there, what does it say?
You read it.
Nation of sheep ruled by wolves, owned by pigs.
Yeah.
Sounds like Animal Farm.
Kind of like that. Yeah. Well, I picked up I got a bunch of buttons.
We got a minute left.
I think it pretty much says it all.
You're a vegetable farmer, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What's the reason the food prices are going up so high these days?
Well, the inputs are all, I mentioned earlier about having to raise taxes,
right,
raise revenue because everything costs more. Well, that goes big time for agriculture, and especially non-conventional agriculture. We used to have a nation that was, in the early days, mostly farmers, and most of the work was done by draft animals and human labor. That hasn't been the case for 100 years. And so everything, the machinery, our manure spreader just broke. A beat-up manure spreader would be somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. Everything costs more. If you're going to keep agricultural production, you gotta raise the money somehow.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please
Get organized.
All right.